States of America is supposedly central bank. It is not part of the U.S. federal government. It is now. We own 70% of it since the subprime. They've gotten busted. And before it's over with, maybe within 3 or 4 months, we'll have control. And that's what we need. We need control of our banking system. And the Federal Reserve gotten rid of. But these people are central bank throughout the world. They control the money. And they've created crime syndicates underneath their control, like Millman. I mean, this guy robbed and looted the country, and I can prove it, for $16 trillion. I've chased the money for 24 years. They say that George Herbert Walker Bush controls $100 billion of stolen illegal money.
Wow. And how many people were murdered and railroaded because of all of this? It's just absolutely...
Let me tell you, Chris, just around me, the people that I've come in contact with, all these different whistleblowers, I know 300 of them that are living and breathing. But let me tell you something. I quit counting. I've kept a list, and I don't even want to look at the list because it almost puts me in tears of the people that I've come across, gotten to know their stories, tried to help them in some way. They tried to help me in some way. It's about 40 people that I know that are dead right now.
I was looking at your website, Stu, and you said that the Clintons had about a 300 body count figure. Is that somewhere around the right
it's around the right
number?
Yeah, it is. It is. They've killed so many people. It's just unbelievable that we're centered around that Arkansas drug and money laundering. It's just unbelievable. And the ones that have come against them and tried to expose them. There have been so many people.
I'm really in, this thing with the Kennedys, because being around that time, and the feeling in our country was much different when John Kennedy was our president. You had mentioned that there was an actual videotape of the actual assassination from the air that no one knows about?
Yes, the French intelligence have. They had a French intelligence officer in the air in a police helicopter with the Dallas police at the time, and that's still, and a copy of that tape is under seal until the year 2000, 2025 or 2028? From the House Appropriations Subcommittee on the assassination of John F. Kennedy that took place in the early the early 1970s, I believe it was, that they actually did it. That is under seal. They won't release who killed Kennedy. In that tape, they show 2 manholes. Nothing came out of Oswald. He was a patsy. Okay? He was a patsy. He was actually working for the CIA in Russia and actually married that girl, came back. He was playing spy for the American government.
Right.
And they used him as a patsy. What's ironic about this, and I'll stay on the Kennedy murder and I'll bounce every place in the connections, is that Ruby, who, of course, shot Oswald, had cancer. I have connections to my ex-father-in-law through a guy named Lederman, Industrial Bank, Marvin Lederman, Industrial Bank of Denver, owns a couple Marriott hotels, one in Overland Park, Kansas, and one in Denver, Colorado. His brother, scamming the U.S. government on a underground a storage facility. They call it the 6th Street Avenue Federal Building. Huge underground facility where it's backup records out of Washington, D.C. in case Washington gets nuked. They did massive scams on that. Lederman financed. Millman was financing Lederman. Lederman financed Jack Ruby on his nightclubs. Okay? So there's a connection there.
Right. Well, he had organized crime connections. There were organized crime connections that many people had mentioned about Jack Ruby, especially the type of business that he was running.
Yes, and it came back to Lederman. But here's the deal, is that French intelligence chasing what they call the Jackal. One of the ones that tried to hit de Gaulle just a couple months before, they tracked him to Dallas, Texas. Okay? The day before, Kennedy shows up there, so they know they got, what are they doing down here, et cetera. They're tracking them. They're getting reports on them, et cetera. So they had French intelligence all over the place. They have a videotape of that. They turned it over to the House Appropriations Subcommittee on the John F. Kennedy murder in the early 1970s, which isn't to be released until the year 2025 or 2028. What we have to remember about John F. Kennedy and his son, who was murdered, going to run in the slot against Hillary Clinton for Senate. And there's two stories up there that I got Tom Flacco to write. They're very detailed stories, etc. What we have to remember is, what did Kennedy do? First of all, he says, I'm going to break up the CIA after the Bay of Pigs. He told them, you don't attack Cuba. What were the two boats that went to Cuba that were all those people slaughtered? That little CIA operation, the Barbara, and the Zapata. That was Daddy Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush. They referred to him as Poppy Bush. The kids do that were being molested. He's a pedophile. People in the CIA referred to him as Daddy Bush. Those were his boats that were under his control, and a guy named Gibson, his boss, who actually put the murder down on Kennedy. Kennedy says, I'm going to break up the CIA right after the Bay of Pigs thing. He said, no, you're not going to attack. They went ahead and did the Bay of Pigs. It nearly caused a nuclear incident worldwide, which will spin the end of the planet with Russia and the United States and Cuba. Kennedy says, I'm going to break the CIA up in 1,000 pieces. 2 months before his death, former President Truman of Independence, Missouri, he goes up, testifies before Congress he shouldn't have ever created the CIA. The CIA was created out of the spinoff of what was called the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, of 1945, right after the war. We have to remember two previous wars, World War I and World War II, had a boogeyman, Germany. Hitler was their boogeyman at the time, created by them. Prescott Bush was financing through Brown Brothers and Harriman. George W. Bush's grandfather was financing Adolf Hitler to buy tanks and trucks with, was charged with trading with the Enemy Act but never went to jail, paid a fine, end of story. Cover up again. These are the Knights Templar bankers, always getting away with this crap. They create wars. It's money to them. They don't care about people's lives. It's part of their human sacrifice because they thrive on death. They thrive on doing this because of their boss, Satan. They worship Satan instead of God. Now, Kennedy says, I'm going to break up the CIA into 10,000 pieces. I'm going to stop the war in Vietnam, which was all based on narcotics trafficking, is what it was with George Herbert Walker Bush, George W. Bush, or George Herbert Walker Bush and others at the time, the other Templar bankers, during the 1960s. So he was going to sign the order to end the war in Vietnam. He signed the executive order 10,111, I believe it was, which was the elimination of the Federal Reserve, which was hijacked from the American people, a private banking that pays no income tax, private banking firm, okay, Federal Reserve. They called it federal to fool the people, and that all happened in 1913 with a bunch of treasonous congressmen and senators who allowed it to happen. Before that, we had what was called the United States of America's Bank, okay, which now, hopefully, because they've been busted by the CIA, by good people within the intelligence and our allies, the French intelligence, have helped do this, and it's based on subprime. Maybe the Federal Reserve will be busted. The U.S. government owns about 70% of the Federal Reserve right now, and before it's over with the rest of the bailout, we should be able to take control of the banks, which we should have control of our own banking. Then it will make it possible for every American to be able to go down and get a loan and get a house loan and do other things without a bunch of people out there creating money out of nothing, where they're loaning one bank to another, and then they can loan $20 out for every dollar they loan, and so on and so forth. For those of you that are educated about the Federal Reserve. But the deal was Kennedy was going to break that up. He also started, he says, F you to the Federal Reserve, and he started printing $2 bills and $5 bills. And that's Fort Knox. And they whacked him. And they whacked him because why? In the Federal Reserve, civil rights, and breaking up the CIA. And who did he fire? Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles, who was the head of the CIA at the time. He fired him. Allen Dulles, right after Kennedy gets